Hey there, this is James Moffitt with Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast. I'd like to invite you to support this podcast by sending a donation to my PayPal account at jcmoffitt@icloud.com. That's JCMOFFITT at icloud.com. Or you can also visit my website at https://liberty and gun rights podcast.buzzsprout.com. That's BUZZ sprout.com. You can choose to be either a sponsor or a subscriber to the podcast. Your support will go towards underwriting the cost of producing this podcast. You can contact me with any questions at lgrinfo@proton.me. That's lgrinfo@proton.me. Thank you for listening to these podcast episodes, and now to the feature presentation.
Hello and welcome to Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast. My name is James Moffitt, and I will be your host. You can join us today as we sit down with Julian Raven, artist, activist, and fierce defender of constitutional freedoms. Hey, Julian, how are you?
Very good, James. Good morning, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah. So from the courtroom to the canvas, Julian brings bold conviction and fearless truth. Don't miss this powerful conversation about liberty, faith, and the fight to preserve the Second Amendment. So, Julian, introduce yourself to our listening audience.
Well, as where you mentioned there, the Second Amendment is my battle has been principally, obviously, with the first, but we know that we really don't have a first if we don't have a second. So it's always hand in hand in that sense. It's sort of the unspoken reality, I think, behind any effort that we make to stand for the freedoms and the liberties that we have, that if we don't have the second in place, it's really a waste of time because at the end of the day, we can be trampled. First Amendment free speech advocate regarding, and it has been for years in other forums, but mainly in the last nearly 8 years it's been, 2000 actually, it is 8 years now, and that's with regarding a painting in the Smithsonian Institution, prescient painting of then candidate Donald Trump, who was running as a New Yorker. I'm up here in New York for the presidency, and how that turned into this ongoing battle with an institution that I had no idea about, really. I'd heard of the name Smithsonian. But it's been a fascinating journey that I continue on today, and I will, by the grace of God, I will not let go until I get justice.
Well, do me a favor and kind of go back to the beginning a little bit and tell us how this all started.
Well, like I said, as a New Yorker, I had heard of Trump for years. I remember when I first came to the U.S. in 96, and I was actually visiting Connecticut. And my mother was, very English lady. This sort of spoke the Queen's English. She's like, I want to go to New York and take her to see Manhattan. I'd never been. So I was taken to New York, and I knew nothing about it. I was in California for a few months, and I knew New York from the movies, and that was really it. So she walks us down Fifth Avenue, and she's like, you got to have a coffee at Trump Tower. So, again, it's like it was all new. And, so you begin to learn about this individual. And then I lived in a town called Nyack, which is about 18 miles north of Manhattan on the Hudson River. Beautiful little antique town, historic. You can see the New York skyline from what's now, I think they've got the Mario Cuomo Bridge that replaced the former bridge there that we had crossing the Hudson. So a beautiful spot. And yet I would travel into New York City on occasion to do deliveries or installations for my cabinet business. And you'd see the name Trump everywhere. Sometimes it was on the West Side Highway, a little sign saying the next mile of highway has been cleaned or maintained by Donald Trump. And then you'd stare up to the left or the right, whichever way you were going, and you would see these massive buildings and his name everywhere, so it was a formidable presence in New York City. So you begin to learn about this individual. Then, becoming obviously more over the years as I became more involved in the ideas of America, understanding America. I came principally originally to the U.S. as a missionary on my way to Mexico, and I came to preach the gospel. So God had other plans for me, and my trajectory was completely changed, ending up in New York. But the more that I learned about the United States, because again, growing up in Europe, you have a very distorted view of what America's really like and what it really is. It's really, you get propagandized with somewhat of an anti-American sentiment. The media in Europe, whether it's I grew up in Spain, but I was born in England, whether it's English comedy, the portrayal in general was always a sort of disdain and a mockery of America. And in southern Spain, where I had, in Spain, there's 2 military bases. There's one in Cadiz, the base called is Rota, and then there's one in Madrid. And so there was it's like an anti-American sentiment in the sort of populace, that you'd see on the walls and the graffiti, "Fuera Yankees," "out Yankees," this type of thing. So that was the sort of sentiment from one side. But then again, what was amazing is I met Americans in southern Spain from when I was very young, because it was a very cosmopolitan area. Whether it was a retired officer from the military base living next door, they were always these larger-than-life, open, welcoming, kind, generous people. Always. I can tell you across the board. This is one couple there. Another place we lived, there was another. The guy was a Pan Am pilot. They were from Texas. He was huge, and he wore all these just sort of outlandish clothes back. It was like in the 70s. And I can remember as a young kid, and he'd come in, and his wife would be holding a gin and tonic, and she'd be like, "Oh, Barbara," they're just big and colorful personalities. And so on the one hand, you had this sort of prejudice, and then on the other hand, American people. And then going to school, I met Americans in school, and travelers who'd come by my businesses in Spain once I opened a business, and they all would dispel this sort of prejudice because they were always curious, interesting, kind-hearted people. I got on great, and I fell in love with these people just because every interaction with them was so different to what I was used to. The English people that I knew, or in Spain, the Spanish people, different. Everyone's different. So that was an interesting sort of dynamic playing in my head. So once I came to the U.S. trying to bypass it to go to Mexico, I began to realize that, there was all this prejudice that I had been sort of steeped in. And it fell off because I fell in love with America. And I eventually fell in love with an American woman, and I was married and started a family in Nyack, New York, that little town. And my life was just, not easy, but it was very, very, very blessed in the sense that America, as a Christian, I began to learn of its history, its story, and how the values that I cherish and cherished then, and the ideas were then framed in the laws that built and established this country, the Constitution and then the amendments and the Declaration of Independence, and those things were precious to me. I preached the gospel in the streets many times, and once I found that out, I'd carry my own copy around with me in case we'd get harassed by the law enforcement, which we did often. And I just hold it up and say, "Sorry, this is what gives me the right to do this. If I'm not breaking any laws, then go away, leave me alone to get on with God's business." So that's a little sketch there of my coming to America. And that takes me then, obviously being in New York, to the Trump story of 2015.
My sister and I were both adopted in Schaffenburg, Germany.
Okay.
And I guess it was back in 1962. My adoptive parents were over there in Frankfurt, Germany. My dad was stationed there as a drill instructor. And he met my wife from Austria at a bingo game. And they tried to have a family, could not, and decided to adopt a little girl at the orphanage I speak of. And after a year, they came back to have the nuns sign the paperwork, and they said, "We're not supposed to tell you this, but she has a blood brother right over there in that crib."
Wow.
And so my dad walked over and picked me up.
Wow.
And I guess he had a little Austrian hat. And I picked it up off his head and threw it across the room and laughed at him. And so he decided to adopt me. So we had to live in America for 8 years, I think. And I remember going to the federal courthouse in Dallas-Fort Worth with, I don't know, 30 or 40 other people and became naturalized citizens. So I'm very, very fiercely patriotic. And I think that there's a lot of people that kind of take their citizenship for granted.
Yeah. It's hard to help people to appreciate it until they've either gone and seen elsewhere, tasted life as it really is in other countries, and then you can't help but, the human condition is such that if you have such abundance and so much liberty and so much good that America gives people, it makes people complacent. It just is like this. You have to keep sobering yourself up because it's so good that you can lose perspective very easily, and that's why we have the madness that we have today, because people they're intoxicated on the fruit of the tree of liberty, but they don't understand the tree. And so, that's the big problem I think that we face as Americans. And again, I always resort back to my faith, the founding faith. I look at Europe, I look at Spain. I mean, these countries have deep roots in the Christian faith, England, and you see the decay is just staggering. I've been in Spain for the last year and a half, since the end of October. My mother became ill, and being very English, as I said, she was very reluctant to tell me what was going on. I spoke to my mom every day. She was my biggest fan as an artist, a wonderful mother. My dad died when I was very young, so I had a very close relationship with her. And yet she was not obviously wanting to either concern us, being so far away, it's very typical of my mother, but she had lymphatic cancer. And when I got there, she was like, it was devastating. And then sadly, she passed a few months later. And my wife and I were in a situation where we were like, well, we have things to do here. We'd gone long term to take care of her. And she passed sort of unexpectedly. And then we decided to stay. So I was there. And it gave me, being back the perspective once again of looking and seeing the country that I grew up in and the ideas that I had come to love in the United States. And I'd constantly be holding them up and seeing this beautiful country, with ideas, even though Spain did not experience the Reformation. So it's sort of still stuck in an ancient sort of religious Christianity, form of Christianity, but it's still there. It permeates the fabric of society. But you see the decay, and you see, sadly, the powerlessness of the faith in many ways that's really living and vibrant. It's a traditional sort of obligatory faith that's handed on. But then how it affects the political realm and the ideas that Spaniards hold dear. And what's funny, I read the Spanish Constitution for the first time when I was back there, and it's sort of a sort of carbon copy of the U.S. Constitution. Spain's a very new, it's a very new country. The Constitution was established in 1975. Before then, it was communist in the 50s, hardcore Marxist communism. So Spain, and then the Civil War, and so, but it became this sort of liberal democracy. They didn't get rid of the monarchy, so it's interesting how they have the whole monarchy attached to their constitution and the king and it's all sort of there. And I'm like, oh, whatever. Well. But anyway, the point being is that and they have a lot of very good ideas that are reflected in their constitution, but they still cannot fully live them as free people. What it becomes is a license then for the licentiousness that we see in the U.S. happening, because it sidestepped the issue of self-governing morality, which I believe was the idea that the founders of the United States had, that they were entrusting the American people who they believed would be trustworthy because of their faith. There's no other reason to give them the freedoms that they were giving them except that they would be responsible citizens because they were self-policing and had the Christian faith as their undergirding set of values and ideas. As John Adams said, it's like the Constitution is wholly inadequate for the governing of any other people. They have to be a moral and religious people. So we see that. We see it across the board. We see it in Europe. I see it in Spain, in the United Kingdom, and then obviously here in the United States, the infection and the contamination it's just palpable, and it's very disturbing. So those things, as a person of faith, are what undergird me and my values. They are the things that then push me into wanting to be a part of the solution here in the United States, wanting to, join a voice to a chorus, join a voice to speak. And that then took me on this journey that I ended up sitting at my desk one day when Trump stood up to run for president after he had shown interest the year before to run for New York governor, which folks up here in upstate New York, we were quite excited about, hoping to have a change because New York and its politics are crazy. I heard some of your podcast discussions say New York and guns. It's that's just a waste of time even talking about it right now. But anyway, we still can have. It's very, very controlled, as you probably know.
Right.
But then we come to, well, what's my responsibility? What do I do? And what can I do? And that I'm someone who's always been active, whether as a preacher of the gospel, wanting to see the transformations that I had experienced. I came from a life of, faithlessness and atheism and hopelessness and depravity. I was just a lost soul, and I was snatched out of the fire by God directly, really, on a mountain in southern Spain. And my life was changed forever for the good. And I ended up here, and this is where my destiny is. And it's a very interesting experience to walk in this land of America that is a place where God really can allow people to believe and dream in such a way that amazing things happen. America has been a fertile ground for remarkable human efforts that have come about by faith and great, bold, courageous ideas. And that was a trigger and I think a hallmark of the people I would meet. They were always very bold and courageous, and I responded to that. I said, that's a people that I think I can get on well with. And so going back to the Trump thing, then I'm listening to this man say what he's saying on his escalator speech, and I was like, wow, he's saying a lot of things that people want to say or want to hear. And it was really refreshing. And as an artist, I began to think about creating a portrait. I knew the story of the Obama Hope portrait, a very famous, iconic image. I'm not sure if you remember it, by an artist named Shepard Fairey. It became like the painting or the image that was associated with that candidacy. And I was like, maybe I should paint a painting. And it was right at the beginning. And then I'm like, no, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't, because the firestorm had already taken place. And
is that online where I can bring it up?
It's a lot. Yeah, an actual copy of it.
Do what now?
Yeah, are you saying an actual copy of the painting?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you just Google, you can Google it, Julian Raven, his Trump portrait, and you can see that.
So what do I Google? Julian?
Yeah, Julian Raven. You can see Trump painting. Unafraid. It's called Unafraid and Unashamed.
Oh, let's see. I see a whole bunch of them. Here, let me just share this entire page. You have a very interesting story.
Well, God is a writer of interesting stories if we let him write with our lives.
Is this it?
Yeah, that's some of it. That's it. Yeah, it's massive. It's 7 feet by 15 feet long. And I was
wondering if I could bring up a bigger image of that. Let's see. View image? Yeah, that's pretty good.
So I paint this painting. I spend I get inspired, James. I was inspired because, like I said, there was a reluctance after I got the idea, sitting there listening to him speak and saying, well, and then they get this idea, that Unafraid and Unashamed, and this picture of this eagle swooping down and snatching a falling flag. And so I have a vision. And then I for months, probably I would say six weeks, to be accurate, that was like the beginning. That was June 15th when I heard him speak, or 16th in 2015. And then by the middle of August, that's how long it took. I was really, just because there was so much controversy, and I was sort of, I was 5 years into my career once again as an artist, as a professional artist, and I was like, this could really damage my art career, or it could help my art career. So I was, I wasn't ready to jump in at that time because of the uncertainty with all that was going on. And then an amazing thing happened. I mean, I was inspired one night that I knew, like middle of when it was, I think it could have been, if that was June 15th, it could have been in the end of July, if that was when it was that happened. But I was sitting down finally at my desk to start to compose an image, thinking, what am I going to do? I've got this face, I've got this eagle, I've got this flag type of drama taking place. And this whole series of events took place very rapidly that showed me this guy's going to win. And I was like, wow. I was like, it was such a powerful experience. I rushed down to my art studio where I am now in Elmira, New York, and I built this massive frame. I'm a large format painter, so my art is large format. I paint big paintings. It's a big studio, and that's what I do. The art and its power is in the scale of the paintings often. 2 months nearly painting alone, hid away in the studio. People like, where's he gone? Even my mother at the time, why isn't he calling me? That type of thing. And I was like, I can't. I just got to do this thing. And I got a night and day. I fought and I painted, and this amazing experience under such a powerful presence of inspiration just to paint this thing. And the red.
Yeah, that's a beautiful image.
Well, thank you. And the struggle. And even though when you see it, James, you see like you see it really isn't what you see. It's layered symbolism. So it's not it's a story that's trying. What I'm trying to paint is the image of this. When you hear the "Make America Great Again" idea, and well, what does that look like? How do you depict that in a picture? And so it's like a dream. It's sort of a surreal image. When you start looking at it, it doesn't, it's like this. And there's a lot. I mean, there's a whole presentation I give with it when I've done that, obviously. So the point is that I then paint this painting. I go through this whole thing, Trump Tower. I meet Trump. All this really cool stuff happens in that sense. I go and campaign for them out in Iowa. I'm a newborn citizen by then. I became a citizen on September 17th on Constitution Day, 2015, I became a U.S. citizen, and that was an amazing day. It was right in the midst of painting the painting, sort of right at the end of it. And then I campaign and go out to Iowa, all on my own dime. I'm doing this myself. It was my painting. I wanted to show it. I wanted people to hear the story. And I did that for a year. I had some really amazing things happen. I ended up being an alternate delegate at the RNC in 2016. The painting appeared on the screen there. It wasn't, this is a sort of a real struggle in what I would say is the right of center art world, where the art language is very misunderstood and not used, and nobody, the art language is just very, very poorly used. And part of my activism has been trying to change that, even at the RNC in 2016, because I was an alternate delegate. I had all these passes to all these privileged events, and you could go up and there was all these celebrity characters and all these very important people. And, whether at the time there was Newt Gingrich there giving his speech right there. I'm having breakfast and he's standing right there. And I was like, great, I get to ask Newt Gingrich. So, Mr. Gingrich, what's the deal with the arts in the Republican Party? And why is it just not used? And why is it not, and he was like, well, it's true. He said in the 40s and 50s, it was very effectively used, but no more. And it's like, obviously the left of center establishment mindset political party has greatly used the power of visual arts, whether it's movies to paintings, to persuade and to pervert and to poison, a nation. It's such a powerful tool. The old saying, a picture says 1,000 words. You can say so much in a picture because it speaks to us in different ways than words do, than sound or music or photos or painting is static message that's being conveyed 24/7. It's amazing, but it's not used. So anyway, that was part of my journey and this ongoing battle, because people, even on right of center side, they didn't know what to do with me. And if you are left of center in the art world and you paint something of some like Barack Obama, everybody's like celebrating, it's what, and then there's all these institutions and systems that will carry that image and will show it and will do the whole. On the other side, there isn't. There's nothing. I mean, it's really, really, it's right now, it's still in that sort of condition. So I then, after this wonderful cross-country campaign. It was in Los Angeles at the major political art show, Politicon 2016 as well, which is like a Comic-Con, but again, full of celebrities. And the guy that actually commissioned and was the patron behind the Shepard Fairey Obama Hope image, the artist was just the guy. He was a graffiti artist on the street, some kid basically that this very smart political activist named Yossi Serjant, admitted leftist. He said, "I'm a hardcore leftist." He says, when we met, because he saw my painting and said, even though I can't stand Trump, he says, "I want your painting in my show," which was at Politicon, called The Art of Politics. It was a huge gig for me because it was shown alongside the Obama Hope poster, plus all the other top political artists of the country, all of them. All of their work was on show. It was a massive art show, this massive political conference, again, full of celebrity people. But this was the strange thing. Again, the weirdness I had was that I could get nobody even at that time, and this was June or July as well of 2016. There were people like Sarah Palin there. There were people who I got to meet, all these folks. And I would invite them. I'd say, "Look, this is painting in the art show." I'm like the only way. It's an anti-Trump art show. It's all haters and just hostility and all this sort of typical sort of left of center, toxic art. And yet here's my painting. Here it is. It's proclaiming this wonderful story and this vision and all this, and right in the midst of it. But it was massive. Right. And so it's the videos online. You see it's in the frame. It's 8 by 16 feet. It's enormous. It was so big. They had built these temporary walls to show all the artwork. The walls are only 8 feet tall. So when I got there, I'm like, well, my painting's 8 feet tall. It sat on the ground. leaning up against the wall. It was so massive, and it swallowed up the whole place. All this other art was just dinky. They looked like cartoons compared. This thing was just like, it just was, because again, the scale of art, and they had this massive blow up rat doll of Trump. It was just this sort of dark, stupid blow. But this, you look at it, it's just stupid. This was a painting. It was framed beautifully. It was, it's whether you hated, right. And I had, that was one of the few places. The guy, Yossi Serjant, was an honest guy from the other side who would be straight up with me, but honestly said, "Listen, it's a vision of hope your painting is. I wanted it in my show." We had great conversations. We disagreed. There was respect there. It was the type of political engagement you want to have. And respectfully, right. And I had one woman who was an artist, and again, left of center, very few. She'd come up to me like whispering like this, she's like, "That's a great painting." And this type, so it was just weird. I had this very strange experience, James. Just, it was so out of league, and it was so, people didn't know how to process scale, the subject matter, whether they should like it or not, whether it should be considered. Listen, at that time, and what I experienced as far as the prejudice from the media and the ghosting of the image. I had Rolling Stone magazine, I think 2 journalists and the photographer standing with me at a friend of mine who was there said, "Well, this is the Rolling Stone. They're doing stories. They're really interested in art." And I'm like, "Good." And they're standing there, and the photographer's he's taking all these pictures of people and everyone interacting. There's people taking selfies. The photographer's having a great time. The 2 journalists stood there like this, they could not bring themselves to engage with me in any way that was sort of, other than sort of very sort of nonchalant. But it was bizarre. They wouldn't carry the story. They didn't print. They wanted anything that was It's just the revelation of the hostility and the prejudice that I experienced as my journey has been remarkable, and that leads me all the way up to then Trump wins. I'm not surprised. Then I'm like, what am I going to do with this painting? So I was sort of like bummed out after 2 weeks. I'm like, wow, he won. Sort of a lull. Here's my painting. And I'm like, what do I do? And I pray, and I'm like, God, here, I've done all this. I've been across this country. I had this great story. Now what? What do I do? And I remembered the Smithsonian Institution, because it wasn't mine. The people I'd met from New York to California had said to me, comments, "Oh, that should be in the Smithsonian. That should be in the Smithsonian." I'm like, well, what's the Smithsonian? I'm this newborn citizen. Well, I hear it's a place where there are rockets and spaceships. It's like, I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. I begin to investigate, and I do the deep dive in online. What's the Smithsonian? And then I find out the Smithsonian has all these museums, and then it has one museum which is called the National Portrait Gallery. So I'm like, let's see what's going on there. And I go on there, and I'm like, bingo, this is great. Look at this. 2009, 2013, they showed very same Obama Hope poster that I had showed with in LA. They showed it for the inauguration celebration of the historic election of Barack Obama, 2009, 2013. And I was like, these people show these political art posters. It was a campaign poster as a tribute to the incoming president. And I was like, this is golden. Right. So I rally all these political people from New York State that I'd met, lots of folks, a senator and congressman and mayor of my town and talk show hosts locally and art collectors. And I get a whole stack of letters, lots of letters from probably representatives of about 200,000 people who are like, this is great. So we've seen the painting. We fully endorse this. We want to see this happen. And I'm like, then how do I apply? And I start going through. It was a local Smithsonian affiliate museum here in Corning, New York. That's a whole other story. You know, my book, which covers my journey, and the book is called Odious and Cerberus. I'll just show you. It's called An American Immigrant's Odyssey and His Free Speech Legal War Against Smithsonian Corruption. And I just put the book up here. That's
that's nice.
That's me a few years ago. Museum. It's called the Rockwell Museum. Is an affiliate. It's just associated with, and I started investigating and said, oh well, they can obviously, as they're local, they can connect with all the local opinion, and they can be the ones to present this application to the gallery. That's a whole other story where I've come up against the hostility right here in my region. Unbelievable, James. Unbelievable what I experienced there. So I had to go around them. I had to file a complaint against them. It was unbelievable, the treatment that I got, because Trump had won and people had lost their mind who were not in favor of him. You remember that time?
Yeah.
They had lost their minds. And I was now meeting this head on. And so the application landed on the desk of the director of the National Portrait Gallery. I called the next morning. And I spoke to the secretary and I said, you know, this is who I am. This is my application that you have in your inbox, which they knew about. And I was basically introducing myself and saying, if there's something else that I can do, I would be, you know, very, very interested, you know, to find out, and you can let me know. And then thank you. And I gave my number and that was it. I was expecting her to call me back and either say yay or nay, or we'll just process this and we'll see if it fits or whatever, however it goes, whatever the system is. Well, 15 minutes later, James, I got a phone call from the same number that I called. And it's the director of the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, Kim Sayet, an Australian woman. And I hear this Australian voice, and immediately it's very snooty, very condescending attitude. And I was not expecting to speak to the director of the National Portrait Gallery. I was sitting down at the time. I have a great respect for authority, and so I stood up. I stood up in my office. I'm like, oh, my goodness, I'm getting a call from the director herself. This is unbelievable. I thought it might be really good. I thought that she was calling to say, oh, Mr. Raven, thank you. We got your application, and we're going to process it, and we'll be in touch. So thank you. Something. Nope. This call turned into an 11-minute argument with the director of the National Portrait Gallery, who began to arbitrarily object to my painting being part of the tribute to the president as it was for Barack Obama. And she starts by saying, it's too big, was her objection. And it's very easy to refute that when you say, well, what is too big and what are your standards? And there were none. So she went quiet, and then she jumps to, well, it's not from life. And that means as a portrait painter, if I paint you sitting there, I would be sitting in my studio, you'd be sitting on a chair or however, and I would be painting you directly from life. That's one way portraits are created. It's not the only way, but it's one way. And so she's like, well, it's not from life. And this is where the conversation went off the rails, because knowing as I did the story of the Obama Hope poster, I knew it intimately. I met the patron, the very person who commissioned it, the very guy. Yossi Sergent was the guy who made that painting the world famous image that it became. He was the marketing genius. He took that image, he commissioned it, he paid the guy $100. The guy who took it off the internet was just a photograph from an AP photographer named Manny Friedman. He took his photograph, he photoshopped it overnight and then printed it out, and that was it. It was a 24-hour thing for $100, and it became this global phenomenon. Because of the work of Yossi Sergent. He's the guy who was the mind behind it. So here this woman says to me, well, it's not from life, as an objection to my painting, because mine was not painted from life. I used photographs from the internet to paint from myself. And I said, well, hold on a second. You showed the Obama Hope poster in 2009 and 2013, and that was a Photoshop photo. That was not from life.
Right.
And she turns, oh, yes, it was. Yes, it was. Now she starts lying through her teeth. She starts raising her voice, and it becomes a full-blown argument. After that objection, she jumps to, it's too pro-Trump. I'm like, too pro-Trump? How can a portrait not be pro the subject? That's what a portrait is. Then she jumps to this. She goes, it's too political. And I said, it's too political? I said, you showed the Obama Hope poster. That's a campaign poster that was used to elect Barack Obama. That's as political as you can get. And mine is too political? I could not believe it. Then she starts to needle me because I'm refuting her. And she's then, yeah, I know how hard it is to hear this, because in the art world, it's tough. You get rejected, and you get rejected a lot. And when it's legitimate, it's legitimate. Or it can be arbitrary in a place that's arbitrary, and they can say, we just don't like you, get out of here, whatever. But this is the National Portrait Gallery. You've shown political artwork, and now you're objecting in such an arbitrary fashion. Her final thing to me, she's like, needling, yeah, it's so hard. She really knew how to drive her knife deep. And then she goes, yep, it's just no good, she says. It's so hard. I know it's so hard for you to hear, but it's just no good. And I said, no good? I said, my painting's 102 square feet. It is 7 by 15 feet in size. And you were looking at a 4 by 6 inch, if that picture, photo of it on a computer screen, and you're going to tell me it's no good? What type of artistic criteria can you apply to an image of a hand-painted painting without even seeing it? And again, she's stumbling and fumbling. Where is it? Where is it? Like I should see it. And I'm like, it's in upstate New York in my studio. Well, we're not going to go up there, type of thing. And then in her shrill Australian accent, James, she says, I am the director of the National Portrait Gallery. Your application will go no further. You can appeal it all you want. Click. And that's how it ended.
Wow. That's crazy. I guess we can probably say she's a Trump hater.
The hostility was so I mean, listen, it just people lost their minds. And so anyway, the journey then again from there, and her, I was stunned. I felt violated. I felt like I was abused. I was really stunned by this. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to turn. Right. It took me 2 days to tell my wife. When she found out, she blew a gasket. She's like, I can't believe what I'm hearing. And I said, well, that's why I wrote it down as well. Like half an hour later, I wrote down, just so I learned in life you need to be quick to write stuff down. I didn't record it, which I wish I had. It would have been epic. But I didn't. Right. So that's what I did. And so, I hear in my head a week later, you can appeal it all you want. You can appeal it all you want. So I start to appeal. And I then start investigating who is her boss. What's the Smithsonian Institution? Oh, I discover the Board of Regents. And guess who's on the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institution? The Chancellor of the Smithsonian Institution, John G. Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States. There are 17 people on there. There are 3 members of Congress, 3 members of the Senate, the Vice President sits on the board, and 9 members of the public. Oh, my goodness, the Chief Justice. Wonderful. Let me file my appeal. I make 17 copies of my appeal, telling what she did. I put the application, all the letters of reference that I got, all the copies, the big prints of the paper, 17 packets, schlep it to the post office and mail it off. And I don't hear anything back. And then like a week, 10 days later, and this is now late into December, the inauguration is January 20th. So I'm getting nervous because this is already derailing what I thought was going to be an instant hit, because they'd already shown the other political artwork. Mine was just a winner. I get a letter from a guy named Richard Curran, Dr. Richard Curran from the Smithsonian, who writes me this very short letter, which basically says, the Board of Regents, or John Roberts, the Chancellor, they've handed me your letter, he says, and it's all in my book. All the documentation is in there. And we already have a plan for the inauguration, which was absolute nonsense. And I agree with everything that Kim says. So he agrees with what happened to me. He doesn't adjudicate the appeal. He doesn't consider anything that I said. He doesn't consider any of the abuse that I experienced, this abuse of power. The first chapter of my book, where it's called Abuse. It's called Power and Abuse. He doesn't address any of it. He ignores it all, writes a short letter and says goodbye and slams the door in my face and refuses to respond to any correspondence further than that. So I'm like, I got a black eye. I just been kicked between the legs. And I'm like, okay, now I try to see through my tears. Like, what do I do next? And I'm going to appeal this now. I've got to go to court. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have that. I'm an artist up here in Elmira, New York. I have resources and hire lawyers and all this. I just thought I had a connection to the internet and I can research and find stuff out. And so I find out how to sue them, and I start my journey. And I've been suing them, James, for 8 years. I am on my 3rd lawsuit right now. And my lawsuit right now may be finally the one that is going to puncture this whole enigma, because what I waded into was, when we talk about God's plan and destiny for someone's life, I never looked for it. I just followed my creative impulse to make something beautiful and to proclaim the ideas that I fell in love with and celebrate this great country. And then I come up against this. But this was just a picture of what I would encounter behind the Smithsonian door, in the castle door, and what the Smithsonian is and where it comes from, and this fascinating journey of learning, but then also what it's becoming today and how it's this very bankrupt, twisted, it never was intended to be what it is today in the sense of who's running it, how they run it. It's a completely hijacked organization, and it was then used, and it continued to be used as a means of silencing my free speech, my First Amendment free speech, guaranteed free speech rights. You would not believe how even the courts are so misguided and hostile towards anybody who dares to sue the Smithsonian Institution. The Smithsonian Institution, I've learned in America, holds a pseudo-sacred place in the heart of Americans who have grown up here. Maybe you, not the same because you came here not born, right? But most Americans are sort of like pilgrimage fashion, are sort of traipsed down to Washington, D.C., and they're given a tour of the Smithsonian, and it's sort of inducted into the Smithsonian ideology. And listen, as an institution of knowledge and learning, and this has this wonderful reality of what it was meant to be and what a lot of it is. But what it became when it became an ideological storytelling engine that was hijacked to dissuade people from certain ideas and to promote and propagate these other distorted ideas, that's what I can. And I didn't know. And as somebody who wants to see things square and right and true and say, but let's just do things this way, this is how it says it, let's do it. I discovered this just absolute mess behind it. And so I sue, and even the like I said, the courts, this is so bizarre how they had to twist the judge, and this is a Federalist judge, who was even appointed by, at that time, President Trump, he botched it so badly. He was brand new. He was a federal DOJ prosecutor before he became a judge. I think my case was his either first or second case. It should never have been given to someone who was just brand new to the job of being a judge. He had no clue about trust law, no clue at all. And he had to make up he made up law in order to deprive me of my First Amendment free speech rights. And it's so clear, and I have so many cases that support me, that I am completely right in the sense that if the government or a government agency or an instrumentality, which the Smithsonian Institution is, if in any way they create a forum for protected speech, like they showed the political speech of Shepard Fairey, the artist with his Obama portrait, and they showed it in that space. The minute they do that, they've created a forum for political, artistic speech. And nobody can bar any presentation of any artwork from different viewpoints of political speech based on their content as far as viewpoint. In other words, when she said to me, "It's too political," you are discriminating against my political point of view. And you cannot, because you've already said that this is a political speech forum. So I argued that ad nauseum, and I have all the cases to support it, but the courts could not agree with me. I'm nobody. I'm this little artist from upstate New York. This is how bizarre it is. The judge, on his own, without any law, because there is none, he didn't cite any law, he made it up. He said basically, well, the Smithsonian used to be a private institution, and it's not anymore. It's now been ratified by Congress. All this wording was absolute baloney. It was absolute, it's legal fiction is what I call it. No citation of law. And then he says, the Smithsonian is the government through and through. In other words, his declaration declared the Smithsonian to be absolutely the federal government of the United States, that every decision that they make in the Smithsonian is the voice of the federal government. And so when they spoke, it was government speech that trumps First Amendment speech, which is true. If, for example, the example I use, if you walk into Congress when Congress is in session and there are congressmen speaking, you can't walk in there and start yelling and shouting and say, "I have free speech, I want to speak," or what, that's the government doing government stuff in government spaces. That's true. That is government speech. But it is not true in this forum, which is the Smithsonian Institution. And worst of all, where you can see how much of a botch this was. If it was true, then when the Supreme Court Chief Justice, John Roberts, and the Vice President, and 3 members of Congress, and 3 members of the Senate, and 9 members unelected of the public sit down at a table and make decisions as the Smithsonian Board of Regents, they are making decisions supposedly as the federal government, which then I argue and say, well, have you never heard of the separation of powers? The whole point of the American system is that these 3 branches of government must stay independent. They can't overlap and become suddenly all pally-pally with the federal government. If you look at my book, and this is what's so bizarre, even the judge called it Cerberus-like, which is the ancient Greek mythological hellhound, which is in my book there, guarding the gates to the Smithsonian. And there you can see me with the 3 collars and the chains. I'm going up there to collar this beast and bring it into subjection to the Constitution of the United States, to bring the government itself into, that's what it's there for. As you know, I don't need to tell you, you know, that your listeners know, and this is the insanity, because the judge had to twist the law to defend the Smithsonian operates with such prestige. Don't forget, his boss is John Roberts, Judge McFadden. You know, John Roberts holds multiple titles and positions in Washington, D.C. and across the country. He is the chief judge of the federal court system, not just the chief justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. He's the chancellor of the Smithsonian. He's this. I listed in my book. Oh, you wouldn't believe the titles this man holds, the position he holds. And one of them, obviously, is that he's basically, I called him in the book, Judge McFadden's daddy. You know, he's this little judge who just started. His big boss is John Roberts, way up the top of the tree. And so here I am, and John Roberts was a defendant in my case because of his refusal to adjudicate my appeal as Chancellor of the Smithsonian according to law. They could not accept this filing by a pro se, self-represented immigrant artist who dared to bring them and hold them to account to the very laws that they claim, and the very laws that I, as an immigrant, had to swear allegiance to. I don't know, when you became a citizen, was that required of you at that age, that you pledged allegiance?
I think so, yeah.
You did the same. So you swear allegiance to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to uphold the laws of this country. That's the oath that you swear. And I don't take those things lightly. And so what? I meant to swear that oath and then sit there and get kicked about by these people who trample the very thing that I swore an oath to, who are the very people that claim to represent. It's unbelievable. Why? Because of prestige, because of fame and glory and all they're so important. But this person is not, because I'm an inconvenience right now and this whole thing. So this story, James, is 8 years, and I've gone through some of the darkest times with this, the most discouraging, disappointing, just like sick to my stomach. I don't want to. I was in Spain the last year and a half, and it was like on the tail of the whole thing. I was like, I don't even want to be there. I want to give up my citizenship. I don't even want to be in that place ever again because of the betrayal that you experience at such a high level. Because my lawsuit went all the way to the Supreme Court. I appealed it all by myself through the Circuit Court of Appeals, through then that's 3 judges above the 1 judge. And then above those 3 judges, before you get to the Supreme Court, there's the en banc judgeship of the Circuit Court of Appeals, which is 16 judges. 16 of them sit before the 9 Supreme Court justices. They kicked it to the curb. And then I appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in writing I have, John Roberts had to recuse himself from considering my petition, and the other 9 justices kicked the can down the road, because obviously it would be a huge inconvenience if John Roberts had to be recused in a case, and then he's part of the case if I'm standing there in the Supreme Court calling him to account, calling him to breaching all of the rights, the fiduciary duties as trustees, and the First Amendment protections that I had that were trampled. And there the guy is. He knew all about it. He got the appeal on his desk, and he handed it off to a guy who kicked me between the legs and slammed the door in my face. And so this type of corruption is what I've experienced. And then I sued again in 2022 because the same woman, Kim Sayet, after I produced my book, which she's the antagonist in, I sent her a tweet to the official Smithsonian page. It's another story of the corruption that was twisted to defend her. Because when you said, yes, she was a Trump hater, yeah, she marched in the anti-Trump march the day after he was inaugurated, January 2017. She marched in that and then tweeted selfies marching in it to the Smithsonian website. And I got all this, and you're like, you gotta be stupid. You got to be absolutely stupid. And so I have this as part of my evidence. And what do? The Smithsonian and her, they changed the ownership of that. They privatized that Twitter page, and they strip it of all the government, all the protection that they put on there, all the Smithsonian verbiage is a Smithsonian. And it's like, this is the private page of Kim Sayet, in order to try to protect her even more, because she, again, shot herself in the feet with it. So amazing how, to what lengths they will go to protect themselves. And yet, as I wadded and plodded along, I learned more and more about the depths of corruption over the years. Corruption, it's all in my book. It's documented. I'm not making it up. And yet people cannot bring themselves to even want to consider, in the general sense, most people, the Smithsonian holds such a sacred place in their mind, that they are like, no, this is this guy, this outlier over here. There must be something wrong with him. And yet here I am still 8 years later now with my 3rd lawsuit, because the most amazing thing happened last month, which was that article in the Washington Post, or 3 articles, or 4 actually, that came out. Did you read that story? Oh, no, you said you didn't read it, but are you familiar with what happened to the National Portrait Gallery director?
No,
Well, because of my litigation, and I've had a congressional bill to amend the Smithsonian pushed in 2022. It was rejected and ignored. I've been pushing hard for years. The story is known. It's been in Washington, D.C. since 2017. It's been covered extensively, so it's well known. But I think the best thing that I had happen to me is in 2022, I was interviewed by Ed Martin, an attorney who was part of, his radio show was called the Pro-America Report, and he was part of the sort of conservative movement organization founded by Phyllis Schlafly, if you're familiar with her. So it's prominent in the conservative circles. And he interviewed me with my book, and he was like, wow, I couldn't believe this. He's like, whoa. And we had a great conversation, thoroughly. We had a great dialogue, and he read the book. He knew the story. Well, Ed Martin, when I heard in this new administration, when I heard, all the goings on, Ed Martin was being pushed up there to be, so he was, I don't know if it was assistant AG or he was rejected by Congress, but he now is the pardon attorney, but he's also involved in basically rooting out partisanship in the Department of Justice. So he's gone from this attorney that interviewed me with a radio show to now being right up there in the Department of Justice. So when Trump said in May 30th, he said, many people have told me that this woman, Kim Sayet, is highly partisan and unfit for the job. My attention was like, because he fired her. Basically, May 30th, he fired Kim Sayet. And he picked out this one Australian, and she's Australian, one woman from this whole museum complex and all this. He just picks out this one woman who's the woman that rejected, knows the whole story. And it turns out, the Washington Post calls me the next day, and Mr. Raven, you know that you're number 4 on the president's list of 17 reasons to fire Kim Sayet. I think that's the part that is the most interesting in that. Did you catch that part?
Yes, I surely did.
So number 4.
That's crazy.
On the list of 17 reasons to fire Kim Sayet. So they write the whole story, and they were very honest with it, which is good. And then Kim Sayet, then the Board of Regents meets, and they ignore the president. They rebuff basically the demand for the firing. Nobody knows what the Smithsonian Institution is. They don't know whether he can fire her or not. They interview me and they ask, and I say, no, he can't fire her. He has no authority. The Smithsonian is a private charitable trust. The government has nothing to do with it, except with all this cockamamie ruling that's gone on one side. But the truth of the matter is this. So the article is very good because it for the first time, as much as it says, most people, when they think of Raven's case, they all roll their eyes, like they ridicule the guy. He raises legitimate questions about the entity status of the Smithsonian Institution, exactly what is the Smithsonian. So for the first time, they really honed in on those unresolved questions of federal law, those facts that remain unanswered because the Supreme Court refused to answer them in 2019. They refused my case. And so I immediately repetitioned the Supreme Court for rehearing. I said to them, you guys had an opportunity in 2019 to answer this question. If you had to answer that question, no one would need to know now whether the president could fire Kim Sayet. It was clear he had no right to fire her, no authority. He had the moral right, because he's the representative of X amount of people. He had the moral right to point a finger and say she's partisan. He had all of that to do. But legally fire her, he couldn't do that. But amazingly, then the Smithsonian comes out, and this is where it's so beautiful for my case, and comes out and says, well, we're an independent organization. We're nonpartisan and we're independent. But in my case, even though the judge dismissed my case originally, he said Kim Sayet was odious and partisan. And so he labeled her partisan. They said they're nonpartisan. The president said she's partisan. They're all trying to be all nothing, nothing, nothing. A week later, she resigns. So I had this amazing thing happen on my journey. The woman finally resigns. The whole thing, the Smithsonian's like, oh my God, the Washington Post, they came to a press conference I had in D.C., the same thing. They're like, oh my goodness, it's like she resigns, oh, blah, blah, blah. But for me, it's wonderful. It's the next part of my story. But the most wonderful thing about it, James, is that from now on, it gave me the legal ground for my third lawsuit, because the secretary of the Smithsonian admitted very tacitly that they have been partisan. And so I have a ruling from a judge in 2018 that says she was partisan. I have my claims of partisanship from 2017, January the 1st of 2017. I have official ruling about partisanship. I have the accusation of a president, sitting president of the United States, that she was partisan, and then they admitted to partisanship. And so now I have sued them for breach of fiduciary trust, because it is a private charitable trust, for breaching all of the duties of trustees of impartiality, duties of care, loyalty, all of these duties. They just trampled on these sacred duties as trustees. And it's right there in black and white. They admitted to it. So that lawsuit has just landed in Washington, D.C. And to now add drama to it all, the judge is Judge Tanya Chutkan, who is well known as maybe an activist judge in the federal court system. So it's going to be very interesting what happens over the next few months.
I bet. Well, that was a very interesting story, and I'm certainly going to stay in touch with you and stay in touch with what's going on with all that. So I think at this point, I'm going to do the outro and say that this has been Liberty and Gun Rights, where we believe informed citizens make resilient communities. Big thanks to Julian Raven for raising the bar. If today's episode sparked something, share it, speak up, and show up. Your voice matters. Julian, thank you for being here.
Thank you, James. It's been a pleasure.
And to my listening audience, I'll say thank you for the privilege of your time. Share this with all your friends, family, and coworkers, and we'll talk to you later.